All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining. My name is Hannah Landers. I'm the Assistant Director of Career Services and Student Programming here in Pamplin. We are really excited for today's career chat. We're going to be talking about offers. So navigating multiple offers, accepting, declining, and potentially even negotiating offers. So today, I would be more than happy to answer questions as we go along. Please throw any questions you have in the chat rather than coming off mute, just so that we can record today's session. It will be up on our YouTube later. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so this is today's agenda. We are going to be talking about evaluating your offer, all the different aspects that you might want to consider. We'll also talk about what to do if you need to ask for an extension and when to ask for an extension, how to navigate multiple offers, potentially negotiating and what that looks like, and then of course, declining and accepting an offer. So jumping right in, we're going to start with evaluating your offer. There's a couple of things I want to mention before I break down the different parts of an offer. So first of all, I want to make sure I mention it's really, really important to evaluate an offer holistically. So a lot of times when we're talking with students and looking at an offer, the first thing we're talking about is salary, which of course is important, and we do want to consider that. But there's a lot of other pieces of an offer beyond just salary that will affect the monetary value of the offer, but also will affect your work-life balance and what life looks like after you graduate. So we'll talk about all those different pieces and how you can kind of look beyond just salary when you're evaluating. The other thing I want to mention is considering your own personal priorities. No one can tell you what's more important to you as far as your full-time work or your internship other than you. So I'll break down some of the most common reasons that we see students prioritizing certain offers over others and things you might want to consider. But I really want to encourage you to look internally and think about what's important for you now and long term and how that affects your decisions with your offers. And then finally, I just want to stress you need to ask all your questions. You are signing a document, usually kind of a long document. So it's really important that you ask your recruiter if you have any questions about anything that's listed on the offer. If you don't understand something about the retirement plan or the PTO or leave plan, make sure you're asking those questions to your recruiter. You can, of course, also come talk with career services. You can talk with your family, with your peers and your network. We just really encourage you to kind of do your due diligence before you sign an offer. I will probably mention multiple times throughout this presentation that you should come talk to career services when you're dealing with offers and decisions there, because it can be complicated. There's a lot of different factors. So we really, really want you to utilize us. That's our email there. I'll have it again at the end. Please come talk to us if you're unsure about something with your offers. All right, so we're going to start off with a couple of different pieces of an offer that you might want to consider. The first being the salary. Obviously, this is the first thing that we talk about with most students, but there are actually multiple pieces even to a salary. So of course, the base salary, you want to look at that number, but you also want to look at if there's a signing bonus included. You'll want to look at relocation costs. If that applies to you, some companies will help with that financially. Annual bonuses can be a big part of your earnings, as well as the commission and base structure. So for some positions, especially sales positions, there might be a commission structure. There might also be commission plus a base salary. So you'll want to do a little bit of math. Again, you can come talk to us and see what might that look like. You can ask your recruiter what that might look like for annual earnings, but it's really important to take a look at all the different pieces here, other than just the base salary number that's listed on your offer if these other things are included. So when we're evaluating this, there's a lot of different things that you can look at to understand not only does that number, jive with me, but also what does it look like in the grand scheme of things and how other offers are comparing. So I put a couple resources on here. There's a lot here. So just want to make sure that you guys are aware, and I will send out an email afterwards. If you guys make sure you put in your first and last name in your Zoom before we finish, I'll make sure to send emails out to all of you and with all the links of everything I share here today. The first thing on this slide is the NerdWallet cost of living calculator. That's a really good resource if you're unsure of what that looks like for the particular area that you'll be moving to. You've likely never owned your own home and done your own finances in a particular area. So if you're moving to Northern Virginia, you can calculate what that looks like. You can compare two cities and kind of understand what an offer might look like if you move to a different area. So this can be really, really helpful when you're evaluating what that's going to mean for your lifestyle when you move into a full-time role. I've also included the outcomes that we collect at Virginia Tech. So if you haven't heard of the First Destination Survey, this is something that we push out really heavily every semester to our graduating seniors. It helps us collect information to understand where our students are going after they graduate. And part of that is what they're being paid. So you can actually take a look and see what are the median salaries. You can break down by specific majors and take a look at specific years and see what the common and average salaries look like for your major. And you can use that to understand where your offer lies. Something else that we have new at Virginia Tech is called Stepping Blocks. I will have a QR code later, but again, I'll send out all links. Stepping Blocks is a really great resource to understand what average salaries look like, again, for different job titles, but also for different majors. So graduates from specific schools with specific majors, it will show you average salaries there. I've also got Indeed on here. That's another really great resource, and Glassdoor. These are going to have additional salary information that you can look and see how does this compare to my offer. The one thing I'll say with the Indeed and Glassdoor and NerdWallet, the things that are not college student related, is to make sure you're looking at entry-level jobs. Obviously, there's a big difference between working 10 years and working right out of school. So just make sure you're looking at that when you're comparing those salaries. All right, so in addition to salary, there are a lot of other things that can factor into how much your overall earnings and what the overall value of the offer is going to be. So I'll walk through some of these right now. Health benefits is a huge part of this. Obviously, when you are covering all of your own doctor's visits and financial costs there is a huge amount of money from each paycheck that can be put into health benefits. So what your company covers, whether that's dental, whether it's a plan with a high or low premium, how much you're putting in monthly versus how much is going to be covered. So most of the time for an entry-level candidate, you'll look for, high coverage with a low premium. So that's kind of what you want to be thinking about. You'll notice as we go through these that I'm not going to say specific numbers, and that's on purpose because there is a lot of variation in offers. And because we're evaluating holistically, I don't want to throw out a number and that be the standard that you set for yourself if there's room for another area of your offer to kind of make up for that. So when you're thinking specifics, if you want to know, is this a decent amount of vacation days? Is this a decent amount of health coverage? Come talk to us and we can evaluate more strategically. The second thing I have on here is leave. Obviously, the amount of paid leave that you have makes a big difference in the value of your offer. So how they structure that, some companies, especially on the West Coast, are moving to more unlimited paid time off. We have a lot of companies on the East Coast that I think will have a more standard plan with PTO, sick leave, of course, holiday, and that does vary per company, how many holidays they're giving. Parental is probably in the future for most of you, but something else to consider is how much leave they'll give you for parental leave. So tuition assistance and continued education is one we talk about a lot with our students. A lot of you might be interested in going back to school at some point to either get certifications or to seek out a master's program or something like that. So this is a really, really great benefit. It's a lot of money that they're covering. So you have to think about, even though that's not going into your pocket, it is a huge value add to the offer that they're giving you. A lot of times this isn't going to be listed in your offer necessarily because you won't be pursuing the program right out of graduation, but it's something to ask your recruiter about or your company about if it's something you're interested in the future to understand whether that can factor into your future earnings. Retirement is, of course, a huge part of your offer. There's different kinds of retirement plans that your company might offer. Most of the time, it's going to be a 401k. So you want to look at what is the match that my company is offering. Again, we can kind of talk more specifically if you want to come in and talk with a career advisor about what numbers might you be looking for. But in general, looking at what they're going to match for you. Of course, if there's a pension plan, that's fantastic. That's rare these days, but that's something else to be mindful of. Location and cost of living. Again, we talked on the last slide about the cost of living calculator. This is a really good way to see how far your money will go essentially in the area that you're living. In addition, of course, to where you're living and if you enjoy that kind of area, that can make a big difference, of course, as well. So taking a look at that as part of what else factors into your salary. Flexible, remote, and hybrid work options, of course, enjoyment, right? If you're someone who wants to work in office or you want to work remote, does that align? But also the cost that factors in here, the gas, the public transportation, things that you'll need to spend parking in order to go into the office. This can also factor in if you're working remote and you don't have those costs associated. Opportunities for travel, that's something else that you might be able to see in certain kinds of consulting positions or positions that are involved with events or clients that are across the US or even global. That's going to give opportunity for you to travel, and potentially, again, you can extend and get a little bit more out of that. So that's another way to look at the overall value that you're getting from a company. And then finally, I kind of just listed a catch-all perks at the office. So some companies will offer food regularly for their employees for lunch or something like that. Some companies have a gym on site that's either a very reduced cost or free. So again, these are all ways that you could be saving money, and it factors into the overall, what am I earning by working at this company? If I don't have to pay for some of these other things, if I'm bringing in more in my retirement, am I ultimately going to end up with more than I would at another company where maybe the salary is higher, but there's a lot less perks? So that's kind of what you want to think about. Again, there is so much variation here. So think about these things, but if you are curious about where your offer stands and kind of what that looks like, please, again, come talk to us. All right. Okay, and then I also wanted to mention future earning potential. So I talked a little bit about this, but I also want you to ask questions in the interview process, in the offer process, looking online. You can talk to alum to kind of learn this. Understand, what is the room for promotion here? So if you're happy with your salary, but you would ultimately like it to be higher, is this a company where they're going to have a 2-year training program and then you're moved up and get a salary increase at that point? Is this something where you see a huge increase in 10 years for the most part? Obviously, they're not going to be able to tell you outright, hey, we're promoting you in 2 years, but they can tell you the most common paths and the salary increases that come along with that. So that can make a big difference. If you're really happy with the job description, the culture, the perks, the salary's not quite where you want it, but maybe there's a lot of room for growth, and that's going to make a big difference in where you ultimately want to land. The mentorship and training plan is super important, again, for your confidence level, your enjoyment at the company, but also what that's going to look like for your potential for growth, your potential for promotions, your ability to network. All those things are going to come from a really strong training plan. If you're thrown in the deep end, that might be a little bit more difficult. Maybe that's somewhere where you thrive, and that's okay. But if you're someone who really prefers to be assigned a mentor, have a really distinct training plan, you want to make sure you're asking those questions. And then finally, the position description. This feels obvious, like you should, of course, be looking at the position description, and I hope you are. But I do think a lot of times this gets a little lost in the shuffle. We're looking at all the different aspects of the offer, and we forget, I need to make sure I'm enjoying what I'm doing. But also, look, if you, let's say you have 2 offers, look at the different skills that you're going to gain from each position. What are the actual tasks? What's my resume going to look like in 5 years from now if I go with this job? That's going to tell you a lot about where your career can take you and what kind of future earning potential that you will have. All right, another resource. So I talked a little bit about stepping blocks, but I wanted to dive a little deeper because stepping blocks is really, really fantastic for looking at future earning potential. So on the left, the screenshot all the way to the left is going to be career trajectories. These are real people that graduated from Pamplin, and they were kind of showing the starting position up to where they are now. Now, this could be 10, 15 years out, but it's going to give you a good idea of where most commonly your peers are ending up. You can also see on the bottom there, you can see trajectory for salary. So salary trends after graduation. You can dig a lot further into this in the actual platform, but I just kind of wanted to show you a screenshot here. And then on the right, we have some information about common average salaries for different companies and different positions within that company. So this is data analyst from Deloitte, specifically in Washington, D.C. So you can really dig into the data here. All the information on stepping blocks is scraped from LinkedIn, confidentially, of course. So it's real people, it's real data. You can look solely at Pamplin, you can look nationwide. So as you're kind of thinking about what's my potential and how do I stack up against other offers, this is a really good place to start. Stepping blocks is something that the university has acquired for students, so you have to go through the link specific for Virginia Tech. So I put the QR code here. Again, I'll send an email after our presentation today with that link as well, but strongly encourage you to check that out. All right, and then we talked a little bit earlier about the importance of considering your priorities. So this is really going to be very personal. It's going to be, what do I want from a company? What am I seeking specifically? But I did want to share some data from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, which we look to for our national data and trends. This is some of what your peers have stated is most important to them when looking at a company and considering an offer. So job stability is really timely right now. We've seen some industries and some companies that are quick with layoffs and some that really, really try to hold on to their employees. So thinking about that, culture, diversity, community, there's a lot of different aspects that you should consider. Not all of this is going to be obvious from your offer that's written on paper, right? So I wanted to share some additional resources that you guys can use to kind of dig deeper into what does the culture look like. Hopefully throughout your interview process, you've gotten to meet some people, ask some good questions, and started to understand that. But some other places you can look are online reviews. Glassdoor is a really good place to check that. I will say, take it with a grain of salt. People that leave reviews are either really, really happy or really, really unhappy typically. So, take it with a grain of salt, but I think you can kind of get a sense of what people think about working for a certain company. You can find trends within those reviews. So check that out before you sign an offer. The other thing I'm going to strongly encourage is informational interviews. So if you guys haven't heard of informational interviews, kind of just what it sounds like. You'll be reaching out to folks and asking for information. Most of the time, I would recommend looking for Virginia Tech alum. And there's two different places you can do that. So on LinkedIn, the screenshot on the bottom, I simply typed in Marriott Virginia Tech on the search bar and filtered it to people. And I found some folks who work at Marriott who graduated from Virginia Tech. So these are the types of people you could send a quick message to and say, hey, I just received my offer from Marriott. I'm so excited. I would love to know a little bit about how you like working there and what's kept you there for so long if they've happened to work there for years. So that's an option. The other thing that I've mentioned so many times, if you've met with me, you've definitely heard about this. The Handshake People tab is a new resource on Handshake. You can essentially filter for Virginia Tech alum, and then you can filter for company. You can also put in job title and narrow it down even further. You can put in location. So this is another really good option to identify some folks who have worked or interned at a certain company. I searched for Deloitte here and found a lot of Hokie alum. And then you can reach out and ask them. You can even go so far as to then look that person up on LinkedIn and see what team they're on and really get a sense of what they think about their team. Obviously, when you're having these conversations, professionalism is still so important. You haven't accepted the offer yet, so every touch point matters. Be professional, ask it in a way that just leaves an open space. Don't message someone and say, tell me all the tea on your company and your team. But I think this can be helpful if you're unsure, if you're navigating multiple offers and really trying to learn a little bit more about what that looks like. All right, so let's talk about navigating multiple offers. It can be a really tricky situation. So we're going to dive into some tips and some specific situations. The first thing, once again, I'll say is that you need to take time to prioritize your opportunities. So sometimes we meet with students who are kind of caught up in the whole, different opportunities that they've been given and what they should do about it and all the logistics, and kind of forget like maybe one of these offers is the one and it's already been offered and you can accept it and then you're done. You don't have to stress anymore. So take some time to figure out, kind of rank your opportunities and just understand where that lies, because that'll make moving forward much, much easier. The second thing I'll say is ask for an extension if you need it. Now we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that, but I just want to put this out early. It is perfectly okay, perfectly acceptable to ask for an extension from a company if you need it, particularly if you're navigating multiple offers. It is much preferred that you would ask for an extension from a company that you already have an offer with if you're currently in the interview process with someone else, versus really just trying to make that decision and holding on to offers and all that. So really, really, it is okay to ask for an extension. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that and the logistics there. The other thing you can do is politely inform your recruiter that that you're currently interviewing with, and let them know that you have other offers and you have an upcoming deadline and you'd love to expedite the process. We can talk specifically about how to word that. You want to be, of course, very polite. Notice I said that first, but if you let them know, hey, I'm in the process with this other company, I'm really, really interested in this position and this opportunity. I would love to be able to talk with you about potentially getting some information that will line up with this offer. So most of the time, if they want you as a candidate, they'll work with you. The worst thing they're going to say is no. I've never seen someone lose a position by politely asking for an expedited process. So yeah, this is another option between asking for an extension and hopefully expediting the other process. Hopefully you can make the two opportunities line up and have all the information on the table before you have to make a decision. And then last thing, I've mentioned at least 6, 7 times already today, please come meet with us. This is tricky. It really is when you have multiple offers on the table, especially multiple offers that you're interested in. It is really tricky. So please come talk to us. We can help you craft an email. We can help edit an email. Once you get that response, we'll talk about next steps. It really does get complicated, and so we're here to help. All right. Now, this is a conversation that we see with some students. What happens if I've already accepted a job and my dream job is offered to me? So this is a tough one. We know students need to do what makes sense for you and really look after yourself. I just kind of want to share a couple different perspectives here. So from the recruiter's perspective, once you have accepted an offer, they are going to send an email to all the other candidates and decline them from that position, aka release them from the position. So a lot of times that's some of your peers, and they're waiting on this position that you've now accepted, right? And if you decide to then change your mind later, they're not going to come back to Virginia Tech to fill that position. They may not be able to fill it all depending on the timing, but they're definitely not going to come back to Virginia Tech to fill that position. So again, we understand that different situations happen. We are more than happy to talk with you about how to navigate this, but I just want to share that perspective, of course, about the relationship and the importance of making that decision early on before you've accepted the offer. It's impacting not only the recruiter and your relationship, but it's also impacting your peers and the relationship with Virginia Tech and Pamplin. So ultimately, in an ideal world, we would strongly encourage you to honor the offer that you have accepted. That really is the best way to not burn bridges, to keep the relationship on good standing, and to respect the peers that are also applying for these positions. Again, this is a situation where there are a lot of nuances and a lot of different things happening. So my last thing I'll say in this is that ultimately we want you to come talk to us and let us know what's going on, what's making you consider this, and then we can talk about best steps for you. All right, so let's get into an extension because this is really common, and there's a couple different reasons why you might want to do this. So first of all, if you are in the process with multiple companies, so we talked about if you have an offer on the table and then you're still interviewing, but this is your dream job, that's a situation where you would want to ask for an extension. Now, I underlined in the process, and I did that because asking for an extension is not intended to be for you to then go out and continue to search for something entirely new. So if you receive an offer and you're not happy with it, it's not intended for you to ask for an extension, hold on to it, and then start submitting new applications. It's intended for, I'm already interviewing, I'm already in the process with a company, and this is where I really want. So just be mindful of that. You don't really want to keep a company on the hook. If you're not happy with that offer, you don't have to accept it. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. The other reason is if they give you a quick turnaround and it's a huge life decision, you might need more time. That is okay to ask for an extension. So again, we want to make sure we're asking politely and communicating respectfully, but typically they're open to the question. Worst case scenario, they're going to say no, which really isn't the end all be all. All right, so how to ask. So communicate with your recruiter in the way that you typically do. I get a lot of questions about, do I need to set up a phone call? Does it need to be something really formal? If you typically text your recruiter, it's okay to send that text. If you typically email, if you typically set up a phone call, follow that procedure. That's going to be what they expect from you. If you're texting, if you're emailing, always offer to set up a phone call to discuss further. It's just kind of common courtesy if it's something major like this, like asking for an extension. Offering to set up a phone call will show that you are confident in your decision, but also give the recruiter a chance to ask some questions if they have clarification, or maybe they want to negotiate. Maybe you ask for a certain timeline and they want to counter. That's a really good place to do that. The other thing is, of course, the tone. Every recruiter has the right to say no, so you want to be prepared for that. But if you ask politely and you go about it the right way, it's more likely to go in your favor. And I'm hoping that that very much sounds like common sense. I mean, it has happened. I think sometimes the process can be stressful and those conversations can go back and forth. So it's just really important to remember that your recruiter is a person and they are more likely to help you if you ask really kindly. All right, and then also want to make sure we have a specific date in mind. So a lot of times students will come in and ask for an extension and kind of just ask for more time in general. It's hard for a recruiter to get that approved. So what I would prefer that you do is go to your recruiter and say, I'm looking for an extension. Would it be possible to have until Monday? Would it be possible to have until Friday the 15th? Whatever that date is, it really helps them either counter or say yes and get it approved for you. The last thing I'll say is don't overshare. I think sometimes it's nerves, it's easy to kind of give too much detail in the moment, especially if you get on that phone call. Ultimately, all they need to know is the date. They may ask you why, and it is okay to be transparent, but you don't have to share too many details on the situation or why you're looking at another company or any of that. You can just be transparent as far as I'm in the process with this other company, and that's why I'm asking for an extension. All right, so what's a reasonable timeline? Another really common question we get. I'll be honest, I have seen everything from a day to a month. So there is a lot of variation here. When you're asking the for the extension, I would recommend somewhere between 1 to 2 weeks. Again, if you're like, I think I need a month, come talk to us because it's not impossible, it's unlikely. So we just want to make sure we're setting you up for success and not, making your recruiter mad in the process. But I think 1 to 2 weeks is typically going to be your best bet. And then I would always, always, always ask or avoid asking for a second extension. So if you ask for a week and then it comes to that time and they're like, okay, hey, what's your decision? You're like, actually, I need another week. It's going to come across like you're stringing them along, and we don't want to do that. We want to be as professional as possible. So again, if you need a longer period of time, we could maybe work that out. It's just going to be a matter of what the reason is for that long extension and if you're okay sharing that reason with another company. All right. We're going to talk about negotiating. So this is a big one. Obviously, here in Career Services, we want you guys to have the best offer possible, be making the most money possible. So we are here for it if you want to try and negotiate. I will tell you, it is difficult to negotiate an entry-level position. There's not a ton that we have to use to negotiate and get a higher salary. That's not impossible. We have seen students be successful. So our top tips, number one, be respectful. Of course, I've said this already, but it is so important that you're not demanding anything, that you're asking respectfully, that you're grateful, and you let them know how much you appreciate the opportunity and how excited you are. So starting there before you ask for anything is really important. Again, this is a person that you're working with. We got to work that angle, use those sales skills that you've learned in your marketing classes here in Pamplin, and try to ingratiate yourself a little bit before making the ask. The second thing is being specific. Similar to asking for an extension, you want to make sure that your ask is as specific as possible. Now, that can still be a range. You can see in this sample email that the student is asking for to be closer to a certain range. I typically do recommend a range just because it gives them room to counter, but it also allows you to kind of aim for a higher number, if that makes sense. So let's say you're asking to negotiate to 72 to 75, but you're very comfortable with 72. So now if they counter on the lower end of that salary range, you're still comfortable with the number that they're offering you. So that's why I recommend being really specific. It makes it easier for a recruiter to come back and counter and really understand where you're at in your mindset versus kind of guessing and going back and forth. The fewer times you have to go back and forth with the negotiation of a salary, the better. All right, the other thing is being researched. So this is kind of where you want to make sure that you have reasons behind your ask. And the reason can't be, I would like more money. We all want more money. I mean, totally valid to feel that way. But unfortunately, it is not enough of a reason to be asking for more money on a salary negotiation. So you want to come in with a really specific reason. So instead of saying, I would like to just have more money, you're going to come in with a specific number, and you're also going to come in with some data to back it up. So we'll talk a little bit more about that data in the next slide. And then finally, being gracious. Essentially, that just means be prepared for them to say no, because that is the most likely answer. Hopefully, with all the coaching, you'll come talk to us and we'll get you really prepared, and hopefully you can get a yes. But typically with these entry-level positions, it's really difficult. For example, the Big Four accounting firms, some of these larger recruiters, they're offering the same offer to a lot of people, to a lot of students who are applying for the exact same position in the exact same location. So for that reason, it's going to be really difficult for them to then change the offer for one person or another without some serious reasons behind that. All right, so reasons to negotiate. So some examples, this is not an all-inclusive list, but some examples that we have seen are, I've previously interned with this company, so I've gone through all the trainings and I understand your systems. I can get right to work. versus having to go through this long training that your company offers. That's a reason that might work with a company we've seen work in the past. Another really good option is security clearances. I know this is rare for students, but if you do have a security clearance, this is a really good reason to potentially negotiate for something a little bit higher than an entry-level position. So technically with security clearance, you could be doing a little bit higher level work than an entry level, not all the time, but in some cases. And so this could be a reason to ask for a higher salary. Another reason is certificates or specific training that's relative to your role. This has to be different than your peers. So for example, we have a lot of cybersecurity students who are getting the Security Plus certification. That's probably not going to be enough because we have most students going through that certification. But if it's something that's a little bit different, something a little bit higher level, that could be something that you could use if you can demonstrate that it's going to really relate to your position and help you with your work. So the other thing I want to say, this tip at the bottom, is that it is possible to negotiate other aspects of your offer. So let's say they're not open to negotiating salary. Something you can counter with is negotiating a signing bonus. You could negotiate your schedule, working from home versus working in office. Probably only going to be able to go to a hybrid schedule. You know, maybe you want one more day at home versus two. They could also potentially negotiate with you on relocation expenses, again, if that applies to you. So there's other aspects that you might be able to counter with if they're really just saying, no, we can't touch the salary. It's going to have to be what it can be. These are some other angles that you could potentially use. All right. So declining an offer. This is a hard one because there are reasons that you would want to decline an offer, but we always recommend coming and talking to us. We want to talk to you about what the job market looks like. So for some majors and some positions, if you feel like this isn't the offer for you, absolutely take your time, decline that offer, and see what else is out there. For some other majors, I would say the job market is tough right now. And so if you're getting an offer, it's such an exciting thing to have in hand that we're going to recommend that you probably take it. Again, we'll talk with you about where you're at with other companies, if you're in process with other companies, but really, really recommend coming to talk to us. You can also do some research on your own on the job market. You can look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the heat map that they offer. You can look at postings on Handshake, but we can probably give you some insider information if you'd like to come talk to us about that. If you do decide that you want to decline the offer, of course, thank the recruiter for their time, connect on LinkedIn, don't burn bridges. Really, really important that you keep relationships with all these people. Later on down the line, it's likely that you'll be looking for a new job, whether you're deciding to leave that position or, you know, whatever the reason may be. The more connections that you have with people that you know liked you and were impressed by your work, the better. So highly recommend sending them a message to let them know why, connecting on LinkedIn and sending a quick note. I'd love to stay connected. Thanks so much. And just kind of keeping that relationship open. Okay. And accepting an offer. So super exciting when you were accepting an offer. First of all, we love to hear about that. So always let your career advisor know. We love to celebrate with you. The one thing I'll say about accepting an offer, it is absolutely impossible to compare your offer to all the other unknown offers that could come your way in the future. So it's really important that you evaluate what's in front of you rather than trying to think about, okay, well, what else could I get if I turn this down? And I say that because it's a situation that we see quite often. This is the first time that you're not being presented with all your options all at once. So when you applied to college, you probably got all your acceptances back at a similar time. There was a common deadline. That's just not the way it works with job offers. And even though I wish it was that way, they're all going to come in at different times. They're all going to have different start dates and recruiting timelines. So we can't really tell you, here's everything that you're going to be offered, and then you can make a decision from that menu of options. You're going to have to look, here's what's in front of me, and am I happy with that offer? And that's where everything we've talked about today is going to come into play. Look at all the different pieces, see if it's something you're happy with. We can talk to you about how this compares to your peers. We can talk to you about what else might be available this year versus the job market's tight. It's really going to be important to accept it. You can also talk with your peers. I mean, I think that's an important part of the process, but I will say there are differences in offers sometimes that students will overlook. So if your friend is getting a similar offer at Deloitte, but there's a slight difference in the team or the sector that you're working with, that is going to affect the salary and the offer. So I just want to make sure you kind of are thinking about that. If you decide to compare with your peers, don't get too hard on yourself if it's a slightly different position. Again, think about that room for promotion, that room for growth. But if you do have someone in the very exact same position, maybe even at another company, that's something that would be really helpful as you're collecting data to make this decision. And then, of course, as I've said, carefully read over your paperwork. This is a big document that you're going to sign. And even though it's exciting, even if it's your dream job, take a beat, make sure you're looking it over. Try not to accept right there on the spot. If they call you to offer the position, you thank them, you're excited, and then you can take some time, look over the paperwork with your family, with your career advisor before accepting. Really, really important. Last reminder on this. If you accept an offer, please, please, please cease all other applications and interviewing activity. I will say I have seen some students, particularly because you're likely going to be interviewing and putting in applications all in the same industry. These recruiters do know each other. You know, we all go to conferences together, we see each other regularly at meetings and things like that. It has happened where a recruiter has been notified about a student's activity with another company. So it is really important. I mean, I don't mean to scare you with that. I just think it's important to kind of consider all the factors. And again, there are ways to think about what I might want to do in the future without going down that path. So come talk to us. We're so, so happy to support. And then we really, really do love to hear. So please let us know when, if and when you accept an offer. We can't wait to hear about everything you guys are doing for summer 2026 and beyond. All right, so that kind of wraps up the content for today. I've mentioned a few times, I will make sure to send an email to everyone today if you put your first and last name on Zoom with all of the links I shared, but I did want to also share information about our team. If you're not super familiar, Pamplin Career Services is career advisors. We share data, we share resources. This is our wonderful team up here that is student-facing. You can book with any of these lovely ladies and talk about your offers, talk about your internship search, anything in between. And then, of course, we also do have resources online at that QR code. All right, that is all. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Really, really appreciate it. Again, we'll share out some information, and I hope you all have a good evening.